Okay, at the time when I was president of the UFFC Society and started going to TAB meetings, my laboratory got a big budget cut. So my lab director called me and two other guys into his office saying, we have this big budget cut. I looked at the library's budget, and I think we should be able to cut $500,000 out of that. We spend an awful lot of money on the library. So you three guys tell me how to cut $500,000 from the library's budget. And so until then, I had no understanding of the economics of publishing. And at that point, I became educated on the economics of publishing, because what we did was we went to the librarian and we said to the librarian, tell us what we subscribe. Give us a list of all the publications to which we subscribe and rank order them by price from highest to lowest. And based on that, we'll decide how to save $500,000 on the library's budget. So when the librarian gave us that list, I was absolutely shocked at the prices we were paying for some publications. I remember one publication, which I actually was part of UFFC competition, a journal called Ferroelectrics, published by a commercial publisher. The subscription price was $27,000 a year.
And this is back in the 90s.
Right.
Yeah.
As I remember, it was $27,000 a year. So that was on the hit list. What we did was actually we looked at that price list, and we started going from 1, 2, 3, and started adding as we were going down the list from the highest price to the lowest. We went down the list until we got to $500,000, and we drew a line there, and we told the librarian, okay, from now on, you will continue subscriptions below the line, and you will cancel the subscriptions above the line. But before you cancel the subscriptions, you send out a notice to all researchers in the laboratory saying, here's the plan. We are planning to cancel this list of journals. If you really have a burning desire to continue these subscriptions, you have the option of taking out of your research budget. And if you want us to continue, we'll be more than happy to continue as long as you pay for it. We don't have to pay for it. And that's how we solved the $500,000 budget shortfall. And that's when I became aware of how absurd the pricing of journals are, because one journal that I was reading regularly was Sensors and Actuators, since I was doing research not only on frequency control, but on the inverse problem. The problem in frequency control that I was working on, how to make resonators more stable. By having more stable resonators, you can have more accurate clocks. So by working on the research on how to make them more stable, you naturally look at what makes for instability. And when you're looking to minimize instability, it's natural to also look at how to maximize the instability, hence a sensor. All resonators are also sensors. They don't intend to be, but they're sensitive to vibration and shock and temperature and all these things. So resonators can be very, very insensitive to temperature, but by making certain changes to the resonator, they can be very, very sensitive to temperature, hence a temperature sensor. So as a secondary research objective, we always worked on sensors too. So I had a strong interest in sensors, but yet one of the journals that was on a hit list and we were eliminating was a journal called Sensors and Actuators, published by our main competition in publications, Elsevier. Mm-hmm. And at the time, as I remember, the price was like $5,000 a year, whereas a typical IEEE journal for a member at the time was like $20 a year. I said, this is totally ridiculous. If the IEEE can publish a journal for $20 to members, why should we have to pay $5,000 for a commercial publication? I mean, what a business. The publication gets the labor for free, because just like the IEEE, the authors don't get paid, the reviewers don't get paid, the editors don't get paid. So the journal is free to price the journal, which is what they do, to maximize profits, which is perfectly okay. I have no objection to Elsevier trying to maximize profits, except they're doing it on the backs of my colleagues and me. right, who publish in those journals and don't get paid for it. So their main problem is how to maximize the profits. The IEEE and professional societies publish journals as a service to the community and to basically break even and not lose money and thereby jeopardize their existence.
Mm-hmm.
So when I became a president of UFFC and I started to go into TAB meetings, this was in my mind.
Yeah.
So I started asking my fellow presidents, do you guys do anything in censors, by the way? And almost everybody I asked said yes. More than half the societies at the time answered yes. I said, well, we have a mechanism called a council, which is a collection of societies working towards a common field of interest. I said, why don't we start a council? So some of them told me I was crazy. I shouldn't even attempt starting a council. And some of them thought it was reasonable to try. So I started organizing an effort to create a IEEE Censors Council. And initially, when I first proposed it, virtually everybody was opposed to it. So no, I remember in particular the then president of Instrumentation Measurement Society was very adamant. We don't need a censors council. The instrumentation measurement, the IMS is the censor organization of IEEE. Mm-hmm. And then another society would say, well, we're doing sensors. You know, with NPSS says we're doing radiation sensors. And others says we do optical sensors. And the third one says we do mechanical sensors. We do MEMS sensors. And I said, well, you do sensors, you do sensors, you do sensors, you do sensors. I says, everybody seems to be doing sensors. Therefore, the logical thing to do is to create an organization that coordinates all these activities and creates an organization within IEEE to focus on sensors. We have nothing right now. We have no sensors journal. We have no sensors conference. Elsevier is the leading publication in sensors. Why doesn't the IEEE start something? And I think there is a potential here for the IEEE's publication on sensors to become the dominant sensor. So I presented a proposal to TAB in June, I think it was 1999. The then VP of TAB, Pete Morley, assigned me to come back in November with a proposed constitution and bylaws. I formed a ad hoc committee, or he formed an ad hoc, Pete Morley formed an ad hoc committee, and he appointed me to chair that committee. And this committee came back with a proposed constitution and bylaws. I presented it in November, and I came back in the following February to propose the establishment of the IEEE Censors Council. So in less than a year from the time I proposed it in June to the following February, I went from having almost everybody opposed to the idea to TAB voting nearly unanimously to approve the creation of the Censors Council. And then followed the organization of a Censors Journal, and we published the first issue of the Censors Journal in 2001. The first year we published only 400 pages. That has grown beautifully, and this year we'll have published 3,500 pages, which is more than most IEEE journals. Mm-hmm. So it's been a tremendously successful activity. In 2002 was our first conference, IEEE Censors 2002. We had maybe 400 or 500 attendees, which was already more than the average size IEEE conference. And that too has grown, where last year we had 800 attendees. And this year is going to be in Ireland in a couple of weeks. And next year, I happen to be the general chair of next year's conference, which will be in Taiwan. And the conference has a policy of rotating. 1 year in the Americas, next year in Europe or Africa, third year in Asia Pacific, and then back to the Americas. So we are truly a global organization in the sense of our conference. The conference is truly global. We have more attendees from outside the U.S. typically than from inside the U.S., especially when the conference is held outside the U.S.